Okay, so I want you to do something for me real quick. Look at your phone, or the laptop you're watching this on. Just look at it for a second. That thing in your hand has more computing power than the technology NASA used to send humans to the moon in 1969. Like, that's not a metaphor. That's literally true. But here's what gets me. How did we go from zero to this? From a world where computers didn't exist at all, to a world where a 14-year-old has one in their pocket? That journey took about 200 years. And honestly, it's one of the most wild, unexpected, and genuinely fascinating stories in human history. So today we're going through the entire history of computers, from the very beginning to right now. And I promise it's way more interesting than whatever your textbook told you. Let's go. So before we talk about computers, we need to talk about the problem they were built to solve. The problem was calculation. For thousands of years, if you wanted to do math, add up trade records, calculate taxes, figure out astronomical movements, you had to do it by hand, with your brain. And that's slow, and humans make mistakes. So people started building tools to help. The earliest one most people know is the abacus, invented thousands of years ago in ancient Mesopotamia and China. Just beads on rods. But it worked. It let merchants count and calculate faster than doing it in their heads. Then came more sophisticated tools, like the slide rule in the 1600s, which scientists and engineers used for hundreds of years for multiplication and division. But the real turning point? The 1800s. Because that's when people stopped thinking about calculation as something you do by hand, and started imagining machines that could do it automatically. Charles Babbage, the man who dreamed too early. Enter Charles Babbage, a British mathematician in the early 1800s who was basically a genius living 100 years before his time. Babbage was fed up with calculation errors. See, back then there were these books called mathematical tables, basically printed lists of calculations that scientists, engineers, and navigators used. And they were full of human errors, wrong numbers that caused real problems. Babbage thought, what if a machine made these tables instead of humans? No fatigue, no mistakes. So he designed something called the difference engine, a giant mechanical calculator made of gears and levers. He actually got the British government to fund it. But the engineering of the time wasn't precise enough to build it properly, and the project fell apart. But then he had an even bigger idea, the analytical engine. This wasn't just a calculator. It was designed to be programmable. You could give it different instructions, and it would do different things. It had something like a memory, something like a processor. On paper, it was the first design for a general-purpose computer. In 1837, it was never fully built in his lifetime, but the idea was planted. And remember Ada Lovelace? She wrote the first algorithm, the first program, for this machine that didn't even exist yet. The vision was real, even if the hardware wasn't. Fast forward to the early 20th century. By this point, the world is getting more complex. Businesses are bigger. Governments need to process huge amounts of data. The U.S. Census in 1880 took 8 years to manually tabulate. 8 years. By the time the results were done, the data was almost outdated. So a guy named Herman Hollerith invented a punch card system to automate the tabulation. The 1890 census? Done in 1 year. That company Hollerith started eventually became IBM. Yeah, that IBM. Then comes World War II, and this is when things really accelerate. Wars need a lot of math. Calculating artillery trajectories, breaking enemy codes, logistics. All of it required computation faster than humans could do. The British government secretly built a machine called Colossus in 1943, specifically to crack Nazi encryption codes. It was one of the first programmable electronic computers, and it worked. The intelligence gathered by cracking those codes is credited with shortening the war by years. Meanwhile, in America, the U.S. Army funded a project called ENIAC, completed in 1945. It stood for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. It filled an entire room. We're talking 1,800 square feet. It weighed 30 tons. It had 18,000 vacuum tubes, and it could do about 5,000 additions per second. Your phone does billions per second. But at the time, ENIAC was mind-blowing. It could calculate artillery firing tables in hours instead of days. So ENIAC and early computers ran on vacuum tubes, glass tubes that control electrical signals. They worked, but they were huge. They burned out constantly, and they generated enormous heat. Then in 1947, three scientists at Bell Labs, Bardeen, Bratton, and Shockley, invented the transistor. And this is genuinely one of the most important inventions in human history. A transistor does the same job as a vacuum tube, controls electrical signals, but it's tiny, solid, reliable, and uses barely any power compared to a vacuum tube. Think of it this way. Before the transistor, computers were like old water pumps, huge, heavy, always breaking down. The transistor was like replacing all of that with a tiny chip that fits in your palm. With transistors, computers could get smaller, faster, cheaper, more reliable. Then in the late 1950s came the integrated circuit, invented by Jack Kilby and Robert Noyce, which basically put multiple transistors on a single chip. Instead of wiring components together manually, you could now print entire circuits on a tiny piece of silicon. That's where the word microchip comes from. And that tiny piece of silicon changed the world. Up until the 1970s, computers were still things that universities and governments and big corporations owned. Normal people had no access. Then a few things happened in quick succession that changed everything. 1971. Intel releases the first commercially available microprocessor, a single chip that contained the entire brain of a computer. This is huge because before this, the processor was made of many separate components. Now it's one chip. 1975. A small kit computer called the Altair 8800 is featured on the cover of Popular Electronics magazine. It had no screen, no keyboard. You programmed it with switches. But hobbyists went crazy for it. Two guys named Bill Gates and Paul Allen wrote software for it and started a little company called Microsoft. 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, working out of a garage in California, built the Apple I, and then the Apple II. These were among the first computers designed to be used by regular people, not just engineers. 1981, IBM releases its personal computer, the IBM PC. And this is the moment personal computers go mainstream for businesses. The term PC that we still use today comes from this. 1984, Apple releases the Macintosh, first mainstream computer with a graphical interface, meaning instead of typing commands, you use a mouse and click on icons. The idea that a computer should be something anyone can use, not just someone who knows how to type code, that starts here. Suddenly computers are in homes, in schools, in offices. They're not for scientists anymore. They're for everyone. And every single step of that journey was built on the step before it. Babbage inspired Ada Lovelace. Ada's ideas inspired later programmers. Transistors made personal computers possible. Personal computers made the internet useful. The internet made smartphones what they are. And smartphones put a supercomputer in everyone's hands. It's one long chain. And we're all living at the end of it, or honestly, probably somewhere in the middle. If this video made you think about your phone or laptop a little differently, that's exactly what I was going for. Drop a comment and tell me which part surprised you most. And if you want me to do a deep dive on any specific era, like the full story of Apple, or how the internet actually works under the hood, let me know and I'll make it. Like and subscribe if this was worth your time. See you in the next one.